All right, Trey Hendrickson. Kind of shortly after that, obviously Zac has his press conference, as he always does on Mondays, and then they kind of transition a little bit to Trey Hendrickson. And, it's kind of been a reoccurring theme. The first question typically at these press conferences is, what's the latest on Trey? And Zac pretty early on has said either doubtful or has ruled him out as far as his ability to play in the following game. And Trey kind of got off to a bit of a slower start. Certainly didn't pick up where he left off last year, back-to-back years with 17.5 sacks. Was a great player on this team, kind of a catalyst for what they were able to accomplish defensively when they were good, right? Obviously, they haven't been good in a couple of years, but, that Super Bowl team, the 22 team, he was a great player for him, and he will go down as the best free agent signing in the history of the franchise. And unfortunately, he gets hurt. And there's some people out there, and we've speculated a little bit here at the show, like, well, is he, if he was under contract, would he be playing right now? Nobody ultimately at the end of the day will know other than Trey Hendrickson, right, whether or not he could have been out there with his team. But the injury happened in the Green Bay game. He leaves that game early. He misses the following game against Pittsburgh, and then he tries to come back for the Jet game, re-aggravates it, and we obviously have not seen him since that point. And it's disappointing. And they kind of went all in on Trey Hendrickson this year. They're saying, you know what, we don't want to give you a long-term deal, but we'll give you this raise. And, it's crazy to think about when you sit there and look at the Bengals record right now and how bad they are on defense and just all the holes that they have on this team. But let's be very clear here. The expectation was Super Bowl coming into the season. Jamar obviously had his deal, or didn't actually officially have his deal, but you knew he was going to get one. Joe was under contract. Burrow, T gets his deal, and then they bump up Trey Hendrickson. It was, let's go win a Super Bowl this year, especially with it only being a one-year thing for Trey Hendrickson. You start out 2-0. Burrow, of course, gets hurt, and you kind of can write all that aside when that happens for your starting quarterback. But just frustration when it comes to the Trey Hendrickson thing. Also, a lot to be grateful for and a lot to appreciate for him and his time here in Cincinnati. He played through a lot, and I'm not going to sit here and say that he could have played through the injuries that he had this year. I have no idea, right? There's people that are a little bit ticked off about that and maybe think he could have, but at the end of the day, we don't know. The one thing I can criticize him for is how he has handled the off seasons in the past, right? I mean, remember the whole off season we were talking about Trey Hendrickson after they got Higgins and Chase done early. We just spent weeks and months on end talking about Trey Hendrickson, and he was making a mess of the whole thing. He was leaking stuff to Schefter. He was going on McAfee, shows up to a practice, and all the beat reporters, people that cover the team, are supposed to be covering the practice, but he wants to hold like a little private interview on the corner of the practice field and talk to them and just complain about stuff. I did not understand that at all. I think he's a selfish player. I think he's a really, really good player. I think his best days are certainly behind him. But he's a selfish player, and he showed that over the course of the past few years. And I think it's ready to move on and go in a different direction with Trey Hendrickson. Again, grateful and thankful for what he was able to do with this team and accomplish with this team. But you can just kind of see it with Zac talking. Right, it'd be interesting to know what Duke thinks as well. Duke, of course, doesn't talk during the year, so we have no idea. But you could just tell Zac is kind of over the whole thing. And even this offseason, he just was, to do that. It's one thing to want your money, I understand that, but to hold a little private interview in the middle of a practice off on the corner of the field just to complain about stuff, I don't understand it. I don't understand it at all. He thought he was doing the right thing, but I just can't imagine. Can't imagine being an NFL player, but being in that position and doing that is really hard for me to wrap my head around at the end of the day. So, crushing success. Trey Hendrickson's tenure in Cincinnati should be appreciated. Fans should be very grateful for him. I know I certainly am, but it's time to move on. And then you got to figure out what you do with that spot. And kind of alluded to this on Off the Bench a little bit. I'm concerned that they're going to see what Osai has done over the past few weeks and say, oh, yep, that's a guy that we want long-term. We picked him. We gave him the prove-it-year deal, and we want to go all in on this guy. And I've tried to make this point on several occasions. Joseph Osai, with his age and some of the production that he's had and the position in which he plays, he's going to garner a sizable contract, especially when you couple it with the effort that he shows out on the football field as well. And I don't think it would be in the best interest of the organization to do that. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he went somewhere else and had success. But you have to change something, right? And they didn't do it last year. They said, yep, we're going to roll it back, and our change is going to be that we start 2 rookie linebackers. Well, 1, that's a bad idea. But 2, you need different kinds of change, right? Different personnel. Right? Even if, look, guys are going to flash, guys are going to have good moments, that doesn't mean they're consistent enough to be starters for you. B.J. Hill was great when you got him for the Giants. We appreciate B.J. Hill. Again, similar to Trey Hendrickson. A lot of this team's success he was a part of. He was playing good football when you were going on those playoff runs. You gave him a 3-year contract at the end of last year. Right? I think the general consensus around everybody around the team was that, you know what, BJ, we love you, we appreciate you. It's time to go in a different direction. And they responded by giving him a 3-year deal right at the beginning of free agency. Didn't understand that. They opted to restructure Geno Stone as a part instead of, cutting ties with him. Right? And it shows you how they just did not do anything about that position. If Geno Stone can continue to go out there and play for this football team and play mass snaps on a weekly basis, that shows you they have no confidence in the guys that they have behind them. And that shows you that they just completely neglected to address that position this offseason. We have all been saying that. We've all been banging the table saying, what in the world are you doing? Address this position. They didn't. And because of that, they have to roll Geno Stone out there on a weekly basis and really a play-by-play basis as well. And that certainly cost them. I need to see wholesale changes on this defense. Osai, we appreciate the effort. We appreciate the uptick in production. Time to move on. Myles Murphy's going to be a part of this team next year, right? He's under a rookie deal. They're going to give him – they're not going to move off Myles Murphy. He's going to be here next year. You got to pair him with somebody else. I think what Cedric Johnson's done at that position has been impressive. Maybe a diamond in the rough type guy. You took him in the 6th round. I've been all in on Cedric Johnson since the moment they took him. Didn't get much playing time last year. Starting to see an uptick in playing time this year. I think that's positive, but you need to continue to address that position. And obviously, Shamar Stewart, we haven't seen him, and what we've seen from him has been a complete disaster there as well. But it kind of feels like time to move off of Trey Hendrickson, go in a different direction, appreciate him, respect him. Greatest Bengal free agent signing in the history of the franchise, but time to move on and address that position in a different fashion, especially considering where you're at on defense, right? If you were close this year, right, you were a playoff team and you wanted one more crack at a Super Bowl with the core that you have in place, then maybe you tag him. But you're a ways away from that right now, as unfortunate as that is to say out loud. Lastly, Joe Burrow. Obviously talks after every single game, has a press conference. And James Rapien did a video on this. Rapien's great. Cincinnati Bengals Talk on YouTube. Writes Locked On Bengals podcast. He's great at covering the Cincinnati Bengals. And he kind of had, I'm not going to say a hot take, borderline hot take talking about the Burrow press conference. And certainly a very good video over on YouTube kind of breaking down his thoughts on that. And, I was watching the Joe Burrow press conference shortly after the game ended. And it was interesting to see kind of his tone. Usually when Joe Burrow takes the podium after a loss, he's very, very ticked off, and you saw that a lot last year. And he was just like, you know what, we're not a very good football team. We need to be better. I need to be better, and go from there. Wasn't the dialogue at all for Joe Burrow at his press conference, and he used the phrase, that's just kind of how the cookie crumbles. He used it twice. And that's kind of waving the white flag a little bit, admitting defeat. And he was like, yeah, well, it was going to be an uphill battle when I came back, right? I'm not worried about him having a little bit of perspective, right? You remember when Joe Flacco would take the podium, he always had, perspective. That's not really what you're looking for with Joe Burrow, because he's your $50 million guy. He's the face of your franchise. He's the best player in the National Football League. You want to see a guy after a loss that's ticked off and, is like, we got to be better, and holding everybody and himself to a standard. And you didn't really see that. But I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt here because he was hurt again, right? If they were in this spot and had this record and he had played every single game, which, by the way, would not be the record that they have, if he had played every single game and he had this kind of tone after a Buffalo game, I would be a little bit more concerned or worried about it. But he had missed so much time. He's had all these serious injuries. He's missed so much time. And to be able to come back and still be as good as he is and has played these past 2 weeks is absolutely incredible. So I don't have an issue with that. But I continue to say this as it relates to Joe Burrow. There's an opt-out in his contract after 2027, right? The 2025 season obviously is about to wrap. There's 2 more years of the deal through 2029 as well, but potentially could get out of the contract in 2 years. That's the only thing I'm worried about with Joe Burrow, right? He's going to be fine up here. Again, when he got hurt, I was a little bit worried, but then once you heard him talk publicly for the first time, you're like, all right, he's back. And then you see him play against Baltimore, all right, he's back. They're in a tough spot as a team right now. The season obviously has not gone according to plan whatsoever. I don't have an issue with him having some perspective, saying, you know what, I'm thankful to be out there. We got a lot we got to work on, but, I'm happy to be out there, and I want to put on a show for the team. Do I wish he would have taken maybe a little bit of ownership, turning the ball over twice? Maybe, but, he played a great game. And it was, honestly, if you take those two plays away, kind of an all-time game for Joe Burrow there as well. Again, kind of fluky on the interceptions. He didn't really take ownership for that. But, at the end of the day, I'm not too bent out of shape about that. But if this team continues to miss the playoffs, and if this defense remains as bad as it is and gets in the way of them going to the postseason next year and then the year after, then you get worried about Joe Burrow. If they're having the season that they're having this year and he's playing every single game next year, I get a little bit worried about him potentially wanting out of Cincinnati. There's a way he could get out of his contract here after the 2027 year. That's only 2 years, right? Now, a lot of us, they went to the Super Bowl and we're like, we're going to win playoff games every year. It's going to be awesome. Don't look now. Haven't made the playoffs past 3 years, right? That's not how Joe Burrow rolls. That's not the standard that he wanted to have here in this organization, right? And if these next 2 years they miss the playoffs again, I think you got to start talking about the possibility of him potentially not being here, which is crazy. Which is crazy to say out loud, but I think that is, when you talk about being concerned after his comments after the press conference, that's where my mind goes. My mind goes to, oh my goodness, he might try to get out. That's where the concern lies. I don't have an issue with him having some perspective, right? It's a tough year for him. This is his second game back. Crazy game. Should have won. But at the end of the day, the record in which they have, that isn't really directly tied to Joe Burrow, right? Because he hasn't played so many of these games this year. But when you start to see that from Joe, waving the white flag a little bit, having perspective, that's how the cookie crumbles, you get a little bit concerned. Because this whole thing, right, everybody bangs on Zac Taylor and Duke Tobin, and look, they deserve a lot of it, and rightfully so. If you remove Joe Burrow from this equation, I've got no faith that this franchise will ever have success. And maybe that's me being a little extreme, a little bit dramatic. That's just the reality of the situation. So these next 2 years, I don't want to look too far ahead now. It's, obviously several games left. Playing Baltimore this week. It's only December 9th. But these next 2 years are huge for Cincinnati, because you have to show, if you're an organization, that you can put a competent product out on the field around Joe Burrow, right? That you can put a winning product on the field, because he's been Superman. He was Superman for the most part in the Buffalo game, and he was Superman throughout all of last year as well, and it's resulting in staying home and missing the playoffs. He's looking around at some of these other teams, these other locations that maybe don't have an elite quarterback, and he's like, well, every team besides Kansas City and Buffalo and Baltimore and the Chargers would want me to be their quarterback. So the market for Joe Burrow, if he wanted to try to get out of here, everybody basically would have interest in his services. And he's looking at some of these other rosters across the league, and he's like, oh, I could win there, no problem. I could win here, no problem. That's just my concern. I'm not suggesting he's going to do that. I'm not suggesting he's going to bail on this organization. But when you talk about getting concerned with Joe Burrow by his tone at a press conference, I'm not worried about how it's going to affect him and his play over the course of the next few games. I'm worried about just the idea of him wanting to leave. That's just something that creeps into my mind personally. So he has some perspective. He's been hurt a million times. Cut him some slack. That's kind of my take. But I always just worry a little bit, because if they miss the playoffs again next year, I mean, when you're wasting a talent like Joe Burrow, the fact that he's played at the level that he has had since the Super Bowl year, and obviously you went to the conference championship in 22, but haven't been able to get back to the playoffs since, is not good. And, in fact, it's a complete disaster, to be completely honest with you. And hopefully that's not something that we have to have serious conversations about going forward. But that's just kind of my thoughts overall in the press conference. Don't have issue with him having some perspective. Don't have issue with him being honest. I just hope that, he's still committed to this team for the long term, despite the fact that, the organization isn't really helping him out a ton as far as, the pieces around him and the production on the football field.